The Legal Mindset Corner will begin after a brief word from today's sponsor, Answering Legal. Visit answeringlegal.com to learn more about our 24/7 virtual receptionist team.
I heard horror stories of how practices handled their calls and it didn't seem efficient. I chose Answering Legal right when I started my practice. It was one of the best decisions regarding the Harrison firm. Answering Legal allows me to spend more time with my children, my husband. I don't have to worry about losing clients or calls because I know that they're there to pick up the phone when I'm not. The Harrison firm would not be as successful as it is without Answering Legal.
Welcome back to the Legal Mindset Corner podcast, sponsored by our friends at Answering Legal. I am Becky Howlett, along with my esteemed co-host, Cynthia Sharp. We're devoted to exploring a range of topics that impact lawyer well-being, including mental health concerns, cultivating resilience, and more. On today's episode, we'll be talking about trauma-informed practices in the judicial system, as well as the role of mindfulness. Joining us today is our special guest, the Honorable Amy Dunn Johnson. Judge Amy is a family court judge serving in the 6th Judicial District of Arkansas. She was elected in 2020 amidst the pandemic and assumed the bench on January 1st, 2021. Her docket includes cases involving divorce, custody, visitation, child support, domestic violence, guardianships, trusts, and estates, as well as involuntary commitments. Amy previously served for more than a decade as the executive director of the Arkansas Access to Justice Commission, where she coordinated statewide efforts to ensure civil justice for all Arkansans. She also served as the CEO of the Arkansas Access to Justice Foundation and the Arkansas IOLTA program. Before that, she was in private practice for 6 years. In addition to her work in the legal sector, Amy is an advocate for initiatives that promote health and equity. Like us, she is a yogi. Amy is a certified yoga instructor and actually leads classes at her courthouse. More on that soon. Amy, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thank you so much, Cynthia and Becky, for having me today. It is just such a privilege to be here and to be in conversation with the two of you. I really appreciate the work that you do, and just thank you so much for having me.
Oh, well, thank you. I think this is going to be a fangirling back and forth. I had the privilege of meeting Amy at an in-person presentation. Cynthia was supposed to be there, and then her flight got canceled due to weather. But we had the good fortune of connecting with Amy, and so you're our first member of the bench to join the podcast. So we're so excited for this conversation today. And I want to start out by just asking you a little bit about, your background and particularly your journey with yoga and mindfulness.
Okay, so it's kind of a circuitous journey. I've been an attorney for 22 years and, of course, was in private practice for a time and then ended up working the majority of my career in the access to justice world. And it was during that time, it may have been in 2015 or 2016, that I went to a conference where adverse childhood experiences were discussed. And, as kind of we talked in our preliminary conversation, that was a light bulb moment for me, because I sat there and reflected on how each of the 10 questions in the adverse childhood experiences quiz related in some fashion to an aspect of the judicial system or the court system. And attending that conference, that was the point at which I said, I need to run for judge, because our judicial system is perpetrating trauma on people, or at best, putting people in positions where they're reliving it. And so I became involved some when I was in Access to Justice with work around trauma and understanding that. And then for my own, personal journey with mindfulness, I actually, when I was in law school, ended up having my very first panic attack. And came to really have develop a full-blown anxiety disorder. And it really wasn't until several years into my legal practice that I found a great therapist and found medications that were wonderful. But, still just the stresses of working in a high pressure job and then going through a divorce, life happening. I was still really struggling, and I ended up walking into a hot yoga class, in 2018, right around the time I was going through my divorce. And when I was in that class, really, I noticed for the first time ever that the chatter in my brain became still. And, I thought back to, I was working with a therapist who's just magnificent. And I remember in our conversations, she'd stop me when I'd begin talking about something that was upsetting or stressful. And she'd say, I want you to just stop and tell me where you feel that in your body. I was like, what? Who cares? This is just, it's my brain that won't turn off. But that really, the work that she did with me on noticing what was happening in my body, and then showing up for this yoga class and finally finding a sense of peace and stillness, mostly because I was sweating and working so hard I couldn't think of anything else. But that was really kind of what solidified things for me. And that's when I began my practice. And I knew pretty early on that I wanted to go ahead and get certified as a yoga instructor. So it was a personal journey, and it was one too that really had a lot of threads that wove into my professional life.
I'm impressed at how early on in your practice that you were able to quiet your mind. I know it took me about, 28 years or so, to really get to the quiet point. But you know how much it's made a difference in your personal life. But can you tell us a little bit about, in your role as a judge, how have you been able to leverage these tools, and give us some specific examples if you have any?
So sure. So for one thing, it's been incredibly helpful to me to notice what's going on in my head and in my body when I'm sitting in court and when I'm listening to people. I hear incredibly difficult stories day to day, and so having these tools is allowing me to regulate my own nervous system and to be able to step back and take a break, and I think improves the quality of the work that I do. I'm able to be more patient. I have the capacity to sit and listen and be with people in that moment. And so I think it's been helpful from the standpoint of giving me the tools to regulate myself. It's also really helped me to be a lot more observant of what's going on with other people and their nervous systems when they're in court. And, we talked about this, I think, before, but I had just the day before had an experience where I had a domestic violence victim who was sitting right next to me in the witness stand and relaying how her daughter had hit her so hard in her head that it had detached her retina. And she became, she started to almost hyperventilate. She became I could see as things were going that she was getting more and more upset. And so I stopped. I said, let's stop for a moment. And I want you to just take a deep breath in and just exhale and just take your time if you need a moment. So we sat there in that moment and breathed together, and just to kind of to bring things down a level. And I think being able to observe and respond to things like that are happening in court has been incredibly helpful.
Well, as you were starting to describe your that you stop and see what your feelings are, and how you're feeling, where it's affecting you. I know that it not only helps the litigant and helps you help the litigant, but then you're less likely to take it home. I mean, you're always going to take it home, but you're going to take less of it home because you've had the awareness already. And when we talk about secondary trauma, that's just one of the first steps, is having the awareness.
Yes. Yes.
And I was struck, Amy, at how similar your journey is to my own, because, when I was in law school, that's where I developed depression for the first time. And, when I entered into early practice, I also developed anxiety. So, these things that you're saying are just so akin to my own journey. And, it was right around that same time where I found mindfulness and meditation to be such a powerful tool in my own practice. I was telling Cynthia just before that I actually came from yoga, straight to record this podcast. So it was a great way to center myself this morning. And another thing I just wanted to mention was, you made the comment about your therapist saying, well, where are you feeling that in your body? And are you familiar with the book, The Body Keeps the Score?
Yes, I was looking to see if I have it within reach. I do.
We knew you were a kindred spirit.
I had even had this listed as a resource that I would recommend for any judge or any lawyer who wants to better understand trauma that shows up in themselves and in their clients. I mean, it's been really a transformative book. And so, of course, you all love it. It's great.
Yes. And, as Dr. Bessel van der Kolk tells us in that book, the issues are in the tissues. And, it's so interesting. We've had former guest on here who's like a lawyer personality expert, worked with thousands of lawyers, done all the personality testing. And he told us that over 90% of attorneys are highly skeptical, which makes sense to me. But then, when we get into the mindfulness component, people oftentimes are like, oh, that's woo-woo. That's a term we hear a lot. And so I love how that book really breaks it down from a scientific perspective, how trauma is impacting, as you said, our central nervous system, our body, and our brain. So anyway, just fangirl over that book just a little more.
I mean, I think that's something that really, honestly, for people who are working in a field where you're encountering trauma every day, I think something like this is really essential. I think even just a basic understanding of how the nervous system reacts and how we store memories when we are in highly stressful or traumatic situations, and how that expresses itself too in the way that people behave in stressful situations. Because court, nobody wants to be there. I mean, it's usually something pretty terrible that has happened or is happening. And it is just by its own nature an extremely stressful situation. So I think understanding the nervous system is a really important competency that lawyers and judges really need.
And could I say that anybody, these are the types of skills and tools that I don't understand why this is not all introduced in primary school, in grade school, in a way that a person can understand it. I know that there have been, in some schools, they've got mindfulness programs started, but it's not widespread part of the curriculum. So it might even help some people stay out of the court system.
Yes. Yes.
And, dovetailing along with this conversation about, the linkages between trauma and the judicial system, can you talk more about that? I know in our pre-chat, you had said that courts are the epicenter of trauma in society, and, and our process in and of itself is perpetuating trauma as, victims are recounting their stories. They're having to relive those traumatic moments. So I'd love you to speak more on that.
Yeah. So, court is going to be inherently an incredibly stressful experience, and people who've encountered traumas in their life, whether it's intimate partner violence or a horrific car accident, or they've been victimized in some fashion, or they have a parent who has been incarcerated. I mean, these are all situations that generate trauma. And when people are going to court to try to get some sort of justice for those harms that have been done, I mean, it's necessarily going to involve reliving those experiences and doing so in front of a group of strangers in a very highly stressful environment where someone may be cross-examining you and asking you difficult questions. And just the process in and of itself, I think, can sometimes almost create as much harm as it's trying to solve. And, the medical field has really been, I think, has a much more significant head start in understanding this. It's only fairly recently, I think, that more lawyers and courts have at least come to be aware of this. But it's still, I mean, we've got a lot of work to do to make this process one where people can feel, some sense of safety and some sense of resolution for those issues. And right now, I think that's the exception a lot of times rather than the rule.
So in your years of experience, then it sounds like you haven't observed a great level of understanding by people in the court system on what trauma really is.
I have not. And a lot of what I have learned and accumulated in the way of knowledge and experience has been because I've sought it out. It's not something that is necessarily taught on a widespread basis in law school. It's not something that as a judicial, judge-elect that I got any training on whatsoever. And so I think that there's a lack of really a body of knowledge that is readily transferable to courtroom settings that's just out there for anyone to see and access. And so I think we've got a good bit of work to do to make that information and some practical skills and tips available to judges.
Well, I know that I really, until I started working with Becky, I had heard the word trauma, and it turns out that I had been traumatized for many years of my life and didn't really understand it and the effects. And so it was really Becky who introduced me to Body Keeps the Score. And that led us into other coursework that we've developed in the trauma area. And, it really blows my mind, the effect that it has and ripples out on our entire society and, first and foremost, in the court system.
Yeah. One thing that I have found interesting, and, I think that some of it is a vocabulary issue. I think that judges are aware, and there is a good bit of training around this concept of procedural fairness, which if you look at the aspects of procedural fairness, there's a good bit of overlap between that and trauma-informed practices. And so those kind of core concepts for procedural fairness include, treating people who come to court with dignity and respect. That's kind of something we should be doing already, but that's a part of procedural fairness. Explaining what's going on so that people aren't just completely bewildered by this foreign process, so that people understand what's happening. Not taking sides, being neutral, reflecting back what litigants or witnesses are saying to make sure that you're understanding it. And then, just letting them tell their stories. And there's so much overlap between those concepts and what I would consider to be trauma-informed practices that judges should be using in court. So I like that. And I think that there is a kernel of that, I think, already out there. It's just we're calling it something different.
Yeah, and that's so interesting what you're saying too. It's making me think of if judges really don't have that basic understanding, that foundational knowledge of what trauma is, how it can manifest, because as I'm sure you've experienced, how an individual processes trauma is going to be completely unique, and so maybe, a victim comes in and they're really defensive, right? And so, their hackles are raised because, as you said, they don't feel safe. And so maybe, in their interactions with counsel, with the judge, that's coming to the forefront. And that could be perceived, with somebody who doesn't have the understanding as, oh, that person is being so disrespectful. Right. And then, but if we had this understanding, this knowledge, and then the training, right, then we could be more tapping into compassion. And as you said, patience. And it just seems like, yeah, there's just so much work to do. And, you raised adverse childhood experiences, and I think that was also a new topic that I had brought to Cynthia's awareness. And, we've made so much headway. We can really see with secondary trauma, really acknowledging that, well, by interacting with others who are traumatized, we could also be experiencing those same deleterious effects, even though we didn't experience it directly. But I think it's been a lot harder for people to kind of hold up the mirror to themselves and examine their own life and what they're bringing to these interactions. And, I know we've touched on it a little bit, but with that in mind, how do you see trauma really negatively impacting litigants and also victims' access to justice?
Oh, I mean, it's profound. In part because of a knowledge gap on the part of judges and juries about how trauma does manifest itself in court. And I do see it fairly routinely. And most acutely probably in the intimate partner violence realm, just because that's typically, one of the most volatile and kind of immediately threatening situations. But I had a longtime victim of intimate partner violence who was seeking a divorce from her husband. And every time I would ask her a question, she didn't have a lawyer. Every time I'd ask her a question, she would start just shouting and just yelling and crying. And I think that I knew what was going on, but that's something I think that can really, for some judges, be off-putting and make someone not come across as believable. A lot of times too, the way that our brains process traumatic memories, someone may come forward with a horrific, situation where they're not able to describe in any kind of linear or narrative fashion that makes sense what even happened to them. They remember flashes of things. They remember smells. They remember experiences in their bodies, but may not necessarily come across as there may be large gaps in their memory. And so they may come across as not reliable. And so I think it's incredibly important. I mean, if we are to come up with the right result. I mean, the process is so important in making people feel safe, but if we are going to ultimately even reach the right result, we have to understand how trauma manifests itself when people are in court describing their experiences.
Well, I think where it gets even more subtle is where you have someone who has had a traumatic experience in the past and not even related to the case at hand. And so then even a witness may be very nervous, and that could be construed as, oh, they must be lying. Whereas if a judge would sit back and just become aware, like, oh, curious. To me, that's one of the premises of that's what mindfulness is being curious.
Yeah.
And being curious, I wonder why that person is like that. Could there be other explanations that, again, we could fulfill that goal of justice really being served?
I think it's part of, I think there's a hesitance on the part of a lot of judges, and this is kind of, putting my access to justice hat on. I think there are a fair number of judges who are still reluctant to ask questions. They just kind of sit back and let the lawyers do everything. But I think it's really, really important, especially in situations like this, for judges to use that curiosity and to ask questions. I mean, I'll sit there sometimes with someone who's testifying and say, well, I noticed when the other party said these words, I saw this look on your face. Tell me about that. I mean, I try to delve into reactions that I'm seeing. Certainly if I feel like they're going to be open to talking about it, but I like to understand what the dynamics are and what's going on. And I think by asking those questions too, we're showing compassion.
Oh, just really quick. That makes me think again of the body keeps the score, and that, as he says, trauma comes back as a reaction, not as a memory. And so that was such an astute point you're making about, witnesses' believability when, it's not linear when you have these experiences, what you remember. That is such a critical point.
Yeah. And I think too, I had a situation not too long ago. It was a guardianship case where the child's mother, this was a 3-year-old little boy, and his mother was incarcerated, and she was transported over in shackles. And the person who was asking for guardianship didn't have a lawyer. So this was just me asking the questions. And I let the person who was asking to be guardian ask questions of the mother. And I could see her starting to just get more and more anxious. And then she just blew up. I mean, she, threw papers up in the air, jumped up and she had to be restrained. And I mean, it was one of those things where I in hindsight thought, okay, what could I have done differently to put a stop to the escalation of the situation? Because part of what was worrisome for me too is that she didn't seem to understand what was going on. I mean, that's kind of another thing I think that as judges, understanding what kind of mental load people have when they're coming into our courts and how their nervous systems may be so just overstimulated that the prefrontal cortex is not online. And so being able to recognize that for what it is and intervene in a situation. And I'm relieved to say that we had her back in court. She ended up writing me probably a 5 or 6 page letter about all this trauma that she had in her life and apologizing. And so when we were back in court, I said, we had to file the letter because it would otherwise have been an ex parte communication. But I said, listen, I read your letter and I understand, and I'm just so sorry. We're going to have to figure out a path forward for your child, but I accept your apology. And she ended up hugging the guardian at the end. But I think just it can be so powerful and so healing to be able to recognize when you have a situation like that and find some way of generating a healing path forward.
You've given some tremendous suggestions as to how judicial officers can really support their own trauma-informed practices within the context of a court setting. Do you have any other suggestions at all before we move on?
Well, I mean, and I know that you all have had at least one guest from a lawyer's assistance program on your show previously. I think judges and lawyers assistance programs are such an incredible resource. And I think if anyone is already aware of this kind of work and working in this space, those programs are at the forefront of bringing some of this information and some of these tools to judges and lawyers. And so I certainly think that for folks who, who are in jurisdictions that have these programs, they are an incredible resource that we need to be taking advantage of.
Yeah, and we could, and we know that some of the lawyer concern for lawyers, or the resource at the state level, some are more proactive than others. Mm-hmm. And so this is a shout out that we welcome proactivity. We know you're underfunded, but so more funds.
Yes. And it's something too that I think that judges and lawyers need to be supporting financially too.
You're spot on that. Absolutely. Yes. Just imagine if every attorney would make some small contribution on an annual basis, could go a long way toward bringing this kind of training to everyone.
Well, related to that point, Judge Amy, do you have, let's say there's individual judges listening, or maybe, judicial officers who are part of organizations. Where can they start if they're really wanting to, bring in this type of trauma-informed practice and mindfulness even into the courtroom?
So we are starting to see the beginnings of some available resources. The Legal Mindset Corner and the work that you all are doing being one of a very small handful of resources that are out there. And so certainly, the body of work that you all have with legalburnout.com and with this podcast, y'all are such a great resource. You all may be familiar with Myrna McCallum. She has she's out of Canada and does a lot of work around trauma and Indigenous folks. And she has a podcast called The Trauma Informed Lawyer that is really excellent. And she and several other people, attorneys, have gotten together and have written a book, I believe, that the ABA put out last year, called Trauma Informed Law, a primer for practicing lawyers and a pathway for resilience and healing. It's just such an excellent resource. I'm about halfway through it right now, and I downloaded it and just started reading it last week. And so there are some great, it's just a handful, but there are some resources that are emerging, and I think can be a great source of support and ideas for judges and for lawyers that are looking to incorporate some of these principles into their work.
Well, you went out early on to bring us full circle. You went out early on, sought out these resources for yourself, for your personal development. You integrated them into your professional life. And so what we would like to hear is, from this integration, what kinds of results have you personally observed?
So for myself, I know that, over my legal career, just my baseline level of stress, and this is another piece of work that my therapist and I did, but my baseline level of stress on a scale of, 1 to 10 was always at about a 6 or a 7. And now that I'm doing this work and I have a regular yoga practice, a regular breath practice, and am trying to incorporate these principles into the work that I do, my baseline level of stress is around a 1 or a 2. And so I feel like I am much better equipped. I have a lot more capacity to be able to do the work that I do in a compassionate and thoughtful way. And the quality of my work is better. And then I think the quality of my work, it really is better. I feel like I'm able to be present and both for the folks that are in court and for my staff too. They see and hear all of this as well. And I've been, I'm in a position to try to support the well-being of the people that I'm working with every day, which I think is also incredibly important, because they're the ones who are interacting with folks that are coming in, that are needing help right now and have questions and need to know the next steps and are overwhelmed. And so being able to support my staff in having the resources that they need to be able to carry out their jobs and not bring it all home too.
Oh, I was just going to ask a little more about that. Have you noticed, especially with your staff, have you noticed, changes in their stress level or maybe in the culture even of the workplace? So a big aspect of what we do is just talking openly about these things that are impacting pretty much all attorneys and our legal support staff. So, I'd love to hear more about that.
I have to say I'm incredibly lucky because the staff that I work with, for the most part, were there when I took the bench. They worked with the judge whose seat I ended up being elected to fill, and they already had a lot of this going on. The culture. I walked into a culture that already existed that was really supportive, where, we encourage, we tag team. And if someone's not at 100% today, someone's at 20%, then someone else can give 80%. They're a great team. And I think, very open, whether it's expressing frustrations or joy. We play, but we also stay late and work hard sometimes. But I think as an office, and again, that some of that culture existed before I stepped in, but it's really made for a great fit, for all of us. And I feel supported by them, and I hope that they feel supported by me.
Well, as you were talking about the culture that you've helped to sustain, what came into my mind is when we talk about secondary trauma, we talk about the ripple effect. So if there's trauma, it goes out. Well, likewise, if we have calmness, then there's going to be the ripple effect as well. And that's going to go out to the litigants. And that's again, when we're talking with private attorneys, we say, look, it's all about the client. And in your room, in your setting, it's really all about the litigant. Look, the lawyers would like to think it's all about them. But
as you were talking about that, several things came to mind. Again, Body Keeps the Score. Gosh, that is such a good resource. Because in there, Dr. Russell Vanderkolk tells us that the single greatest protective factor against becoming traumatized is a strong support system. So just by, what you're doing with your staff, that's absolutely the best thing for them in terms of protecting their health and well-being, against vicarious trauma. And the other thing that struck me was you said, we play, which it's my understanding that the opposite of, the neurological effects of trauma is actually play, which I think more of in the legal field, at least from my experience. I met some attorneys who might be taking themselves a little too seriously. Obviously, our work is very serious, but that doesn't mean that we can't connect to, our inner child and the fact that it really is, we don't have to have the British stiff upper lip, if you will.
Right. We got to be able to blow off steam and we make space for that. Because we just see such upsetting things some days, but then just hilarious things will happen that we just have to laugh about, or we do dumb things that we have to laugh about, and we kid and we tease, but then, we buckle down and get the work done too. And I feel like we're more productive.
That makes me think of that show. What was it, Cynthia? The jury, was it Jury Pool?
Oh, yeah. I love that.
Was this
Okay.
Jury Duty? Was this the
Jury
show?
Duty. That was it. Jury
Is
Duty.
that the name? Yeah.
Yes.
Oh my
Oh,
gosh. Have you not seen it?
Oh,
Oh my.
it's
it's hilarious.
I
Oh
love
gosh.
Jury Duty.
And that just makes me think when you're like, oh, we encounter some hilarious things. It's like, I bet you do.
Do you know the premise of the show Jury Duty?
Oh, is it where everyone is in on it except for the main character? It is such a hilarious show, and I mean, just things just keep on going hilariously wrong, and he's the main character guy. He's just so good and has such a big heart, and I mean, that it is so funny.
Oh, great. I just wasn't, I misheard that maybe you hadn't seen it. So anyway, yeah, a lot of good TV on this day, these days.
Yes, yes. And so just to bring it back full circle, Judge Amy, tell us more, like, do you lead yoga practices or mindfulness practices for your support staff at your courthouse?
So and it's been we've taken a little break, but I do offer classes. My office space is big enough to fit probably 5 or 6 people with yoga mats in. And so I have opened that up, and it's 2 other judges, 2 other support staff, someone from the clerk's office, just kind of a small ragtag group of people who just like need to just step away over the lunch hour and just, if we feel like just lying down and doing a shavasana and breathing, we do that. If we need to move and do some work and work out the kinks, we do that. And so I do and have opened that up. And then I'm also looking to teach a yoga class at the law school this fall, and kind of rotating through with a couple of other attorneys who also teach yoga. It's something. If I could have had yoga and mindfulness when I was in law school, I don't know, I feel like I'd be superwoman. It just, what it has done for me and just my capacity and my well-being is just profound. And I wish I'm grateful to have the gift, even if it was given to me in my 40s, but I want to be able to share it with others.
That you're just such a pioneer, let me just say. And I'm just thinking, like, wow, what a great news story this would be for some reporters to come in and profile, these judges who are really prioritizing that and truly being a thought leader in this field. And I gotta say that exactly what you're saying is what motivated me in part to launch Legal Burnout Solution, because that's exactly what I thought. If only I had these tools, if only this had been, the training had been readily available and emphasized, because I also, while I was doing my meditation teacher training, I actually, volunteered at my alma mater and was leading, mindfulness sessions. And it was built for students, faculty, and staff. But I think what's so critical, Amy, is that, you're in a leadership position and you're modeling this, for the support staff, for, the attorneys. And I gotta say, when I led these mindfulness, these free sessions, never had a professor come, only had one or two staff members that would come, but if one professor had come, that really would have set the tone, and the students would have paid more attention, and it would have been like, maybe I should, I should prioritize, I respect this person. Maybe I should do that. Instead, I would go around and be like, oh, we're about to do, a mindfulness exercise. And the students would say, well, I don't have time. And I'm like, you don't have time to breathe, huh? Okay. Well, that's going to be an interesting one for you. But I just gotta say, we just admire and respect you so much for what you're doing. So thank you so much for your work in this area.
Thank you all so much. And again, I mean, what you all are doing in the way of putting those ripples out there, I think is going to bring many returns for the profession. And I really am so grateful for the work that y'all are doing.
A rising tide floats all boats, as I like to say. Well, do you have any final takeaways? There's a cat. Oh my gosh, who is this? Who is our special guest?
This is Tom. We have
Tomcat.
Tomcat. We have 2.5 cats. I have 3 girls and who have a cat of their own, and their dad and I are no longer married, but we're have a really good co-parenting relationship and live close by. And so one of the cats goes back and forth between the two. So we have joint custody of our girls and a cat. So it's pretty great.
Oh, I love it. I love it so much. Normally I'm being hounded by one of mine, but I guess they're sleeping right now. But I think I might have heard, speaking of hounds, I think I might have heard young Carlos in the background, Cynthia, and I still need to meet this puppy before he's no longer a puppy.
He's gaining weight like crazy. He's 12 and a half weeks old. And and we have an 11-and-a-half-year-old, same breed. So yes, Carlos was downstairs yipping, but his daddy went and tended to whatever needs he thought he had.
Well, so, just as an aside, is that, we have seen that, I know in Cindy's home state of Indiana, for example, and their lawyer assistance program, they really heavily utilize animals, dogs, to come in and to, bring that stress relief for law students, for lawyers. But also I've seen a movement for young children, for example, who might be testifying. And is that something that, you've seen in your jurisdiction, or?
Yeah, there are actually some of my judicial colleagues bring their dogs to work, and the dogs will come and sit under the bench, or we have a district judge who handles a lot of plea and arraignments, and will have his dog Teddy present. And even for the folks who are inmates who are all lined up, I mean, having this dog, just a calm and a peace come over the room when the dog is in there. I mean, animals and pets are just kind of just such a soothing influence, and kind of gurus in their own right. Just
Yes. I'm always like, oh, these cats really show me, the important things in life. They show me, okay, take a nap every day. Don't do anything you want to do. Don't do anything you don't want to do. And how to assert really healthy boundaries, right? Maybe, their previous boundary was, okay, yeah, you can pet my belly. But in the moment, if they decide, no, I'm not okay with that, they're going to let you know. And as a recovering people pleaser, I must say that that's really helpful reminders and lessons. And, I think dogs have their own lessons to impart to us.
Yes, they do.
So do you have any final closing thoughts or takeaways for our audience, Judge Amy?
I think, I would say that taking care of yourself is so incredibly important. Whatever role you are playing in the legal system, whether it's a legal support professional, you're a judge, you're a lawyer, you're a law student, taking the space and time to take care of yourself is so important. And it's easy to get into that mindset where I've got too much to do. I've got, it's easy to just let your brain just take you in all different directions to where you can't just calm down and focus. And I think it's just take care of yourself, I think is a really important takeaway. We're taught so often as legal professionals, and you all have covered this in your podcast with previous guests, just how easy it is to just focus on setting aside your own feelings and just focus on the law and just focus on the results and just focus on, things that really we're taught in a way to kind of deny ourselves. And I think it's really important to set aside that time and space for caring for ourselves, because then we can care better for the others that we're encountering in the legal system.
Yes, you couldn't have said it better. And, as we always try to say, put your oxygen mask on first. And you just made such a fantastic case for why that's so important. And then it really speaks to our ability to be effective and productive and get to the right result. And again, Judge Amy, thank you so much for being with us and for your work. We really consider you a crusader in this field of, implementing trauma-informed law practices in the judicial system, and, elevating the role of mindfulness for all legal professionals, all people involved in the legal system. So you're truly a champion, and we're just so delighted that you spent some time with us here today. So thank you again.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate y'all.
Thank you.
And if you haven't had a chance to explore the services offered by our host, Answering Legal, now is the time. And while you're at it, please do check out legalburnout.com. We've got a host of resources that we've talked about today, including our blog, where we have written about secondary trauma, ACEs, as well as the role of pets and animals in improving lawyer well-being. So tons of good stuff there. Again, I'm Becky Howlett, my co-host Cynthia Sharp, and until we meet again, just breathe.